Welcome back. So, in continuing this chapter on rational functions, we're going to start diving into what we call the reciprocal functions, all right? So, reciprocal functions take this form. All right, so we're talking about things like y equals 5 over x, y equals 3 over x. So, things like that are what we consider these reciprocal functions. It's just taking y equals a number divided by x. All right? So the basic shape is over here. And obviously it depends on whatever a is, on however much stretching is happening. But there's a couple things I want you to note. All right? The first thing I want you to note is there's two asymptotes, a horizontal and a vertical asymptote, okay? At x equals 0 and at y equals 0 are our two asymptotes. There's no x-intercept or y-intercept because notice on where those asymptotes are, that tells us that it can't touch those axes, all right? So there's no x or y-intercept. And I want you to notice the domain and range are going to be all real numbers. Okay, so the domain is all real numbers except where your asymptote is. Okay, and your range is going to be all real numbers except where your horizontal asymptote is. Now those will make more sense tomorrow or in the next lesson. But for now, that's just kind of a rundown of what this is going to look like. All right. Now, in terms of actually graphing them, now the cool thing is, instead of having to learn a set of rules to graph it, basically it's just making a table. So, in making our table, we want to choose wise numbers to use. What I mean by that is to use numbers that divide evenly into that A value, that number that's on top. Okay, because you can tell that division is happening in here. So to have convenient numbers to plot is easiest if we choose numbers that divide into A. So let me show you what that means. So for this first one, graph 8 over x. So I'm going to start with 0. And now what numbers divide 8? Well, 1, 2, 4, and 8 all work. All right? And that also means that the negatives would work. So that's how I construct my table. The number, I start at 0, and then I include the numbers that divide 8. So 1, 2, 4, and 8 all evenly divide 8. And then I use the negatives as well. So I know this seems like a long table, but it doesn't take long to fill out. Now, I put 0 in there for a very special reason. Okay? I put 0 in there because that is called undefined. Because can we do 8 divided by 0? No. Remember, we can't divide by 0. So I just merely put that in to be the center point of my table and to show you that that is an undefined value. But now I'm going to go in and actually calculate the rest of my values. So starting at the top, 8 divided by negative 8 is going to be negative 1. 8 divided by negative 4 is going to be negative 2. 8 divided by negative 2 is going to give me negative 4. 8 divided by negative 1 is going to give me negative 8. 8 divided by 1 gives me 8. 8 divided by 2 gives me 4. 8 divided by 4 gives me 2. 8 divided by 8 gives me 1. So notice here, making that table doesn't actually take that long in the end. Now, if you go back and look at the instructions, after I make my table, the next thing is to put my asymptotes. Well, for all the ones today, for everything in this lesson, your asymptotes are going to be at 0, okay? And the next lesson that'll change because there'll be some shifting happening, but they always start at 0, okay? So that's always where I'm going to begin my asymptotes. And now I'm going to plot my points. So -8, -1, negative, oh, I'm sorry, that is not right. -8, -1 belongs down here. -4, -2, -2, -4, and -1, -8. So I get that branch. Then 1, 8, 2, 4, 4, 2, 8, 1. And that gives me that branch of my graph. Okay, so there's my basic shape, all right? Now, remember for the domain is going to be all real numbers except where that vertical asymptote is. So in this case, x can't be 0. The range is all real numbers except where my horizontal asymptote is. So except where y can't be 0. Now that's why I also have you actually physically draw in the asymptotes, because then you can see where your graph is trailing off to. It makes it a little bit easier to identify that. Where is your graph going? All right. So let's take a look at this next one, and then we'll be done with this notes. So again, first things first, we're going to make our table. So I'm going to start at 0. And now let's identify the numbers that divide 12. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12 all divide 12. And then I include their negatives. Okay, so that's how I set up my table. And remember, 0 is just there because it's undefined, just as a center point. And I'm going to go through and start calculating this. So -12 divided by -12 is a +1. -12 divided by -6 is a +2. -12 divided by -4 is +3. -12 divided by -3 is a 4. -12 divided by -2 is 6. -12 divided by -1 is a +12. -12 divided by 1 is going to give me a -12. -12 divided by 2 is -6. -12 divided by 3 is a -4. -12 divided by 4 is a -3. -12 divided by divided by 6 is a -2. -12 divided by 12 is a -1. All right. So again, the table looks long, but in the end, it doesn't take too long to actually construct. Now, I'm going to start with my asymptotes. So because I'm drawing those in, I'm just going to come down here and write them in, that my vertical asymptote is at x equals 0, horizontal asymptote is at y equals 0. And I might as well fill this in because it's the same for everything today. My domain is all real numbers except where that asymptote is. The range is also all real numbers except where my horizontal asymptote is. And now I'm ready to start graphing. So, in order to graph these, well, negative 12, 1, that's actually off our graph, okay? So I can't even really show that one because it's too far off. I can show negative 6, 2, though. I can show negative 4, 3, and negative 3, 4, negative 2, 6. Because again, that one is going to be off the graph anyway. Same thing with this one, that's going to be off our graph. So let's just focus on 2, negative 6, on 3, negative 4, 4, negative 3, and 6, negative 2. Then again, this last one is going to be off the graph. And there we have it. All right, so again, that's going to be our general basis for all this graphing. Is just make the table, plot your asymptotes, and then connect your points. All right, so again, I apologize this one got a little bit longer, but please make sure that you have all this down and that you ask any questions before you start your practice work.